It's coming. A game unlike anything you've ever seen. Prepare yourself for Cube. In development for over a decade, Cube will take you to a whole new dimension of computer games. Cube! Featuring the latest in 3D pictures and the newest technologies that make calculators look like the cotton gin. Cube! Pick up your control switch and enter another world. You are now Cube, defender of the polyverse. Collect the diamonds and reach the goal. Every goal leads to a new color level. Blue, green, orange. The fun cannot be halted. Cube. But be careful. You will face many obstructions in your path. It's up to you to guide Cube around the things that Cube can't go through. Cube. And just maybe, if you're brave enough and enough of a game master, you will reach level red, where you will face the dreaded cone. Cube.
It should be good.
All right, sounds good.
Great. If we're all ready to go, then we can jump into another brand new episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony Foraging Fiend Maddox.
I had a mulberry on my way over here.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
There's a mulberry tree exactly in between, like in the center between our two houses, and
people are going to start being able to triangulate our locations.
Exactly.
Now
really
they have one more
ourselves.
fact about our locations, that there's exactly at the 50% point a mulberry tree.
Didn't even break my stride. Just saw a beautiful, perfectly ripe mulberry and just grabbed it. Yeah, it's been fun foraging for mulberries. I don't know. It's like I'm not even a person that likes sweet food. It's just like super cool to learn about the plants that are growing around us and try and make stuff out of them.
I feel like you're on a real sort of trend of the sort of increase in pickling, the increase in foraging. Like,
I don't know exactly where
does this lead?
Some weird ways that could land, but hopefully into some delicious meals.
Yeah, I feel like this could go a couple of routes. It could go like, just, further down the food route, which is probably where you were expecting it to go.
Yeah.
It also could go like vaguely hippie
Sure.
or like full prepper.
Full prepper, or just
could
like
be full prepper.
Go off the grid and just like live off the land in a yurt.
It's funny. There's some aspects of off the grid living you're very well suited for, and some aspects I feel like would be a real struggle for you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like dirt.
You don't like being dirty. Yeah. Why does off the grid have to mean dirty? The
Great
Anthony
question.
Maddox
Great
story.
question.
Speaking of prepping, Anthony, we did some prep for this episode because we are talking about a topic that you and I are not, I would say, intimately familiar with. We're talking about set cubes, and this is something we've had requested many times. People have said, when are you going to do an episode about set cubes? And frankly, you and I have just never built a set cube, so we felt ill-qualified to speak on the matter, at least comprehensively, which is why, of course, we have a guest on this episode. We are joined by the organized play lead for CubeCon, Jenn the Judge, or Jenn the question mark? What's the deal with that?
It mostly was a joke from my local community who's claimed that I have too many jobs and wear too many hats. So I left the part of my name blank for now, so that people can fill in whatever they need me to be doing there.
I see. Okay. I didn't know if you had some sort of if you were no longer a judge, if you had been disgracefully disbarred. I had no idea. So good to get
ascended to Admiral of Magic.
Yeah, what's above judge? Supreme Court judge?
I think it's above judges, the people who write the rules at Wizards.
So like a magic constitutional lawyer, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Jim, we have you on the show, obviously, to talk about set cubes, but also because this is the week that the tickets are going on sale for CubeCon 2025, which we wanted to make sure people knew about. Do you want to talk a little bit about what this year's CubeCon is going to look like and just remind people of how cool it is?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my all-time favorite topics. So the day this comes out, tickets will go up for CubeCon. In addition to that, Stage 2 of the cube voting process, where people get to vote on what cubes they get to play at CubeCon, will also be beginning that day.
This year you have a ranked choice voting system too, which I was thrilled to see as a first past the post hater. I'm very excited to see the ranked choice voting system enacted for the cube polls.
Well, one thing that you might not know about me is before I was a Magic the Gathering judge, I worked in American political organizing for 6 years.
I did know this, but I'll feign ignorance for the purpose of the listener. Like, wow, that is so fascinating.
That is fascinating. I didn't know this.
We've talked about this on the show before, quite literally.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well.
I, too, am a first past the post hater.
Yeah, I feel like it's a dead ringer that you have some, like, cool leftist people in charge when a ranked choice voting system makes an appearance in a, like, casual, fun place.
I mean, I think it is both a better system, and it also is very cool just to, like, expose a lot of people that would otherwise never be exposed to this kind of idea. So, like, that's awesome. Very exciting.
I'm very happy. I like the new process that the team came up with a lot this year. And I got voted in. Very funnily, my own cube, one of the cubes we'll be talking about today, did not get voted in last year, which I thought was hysterical. But it got voted in just yesterday. So if you want to play a set cube, there will be many, including mine, at CubeCon 2025 this year.
Yeah, you're talking about your Ravnica Idealized cube, which we will talk about in detail in this episode, I am sure. Is there anything else that's new or exciting about CubeCon this year? I mean, I guess we should, just for people that maybe don't know, this is like the cube event. It is sort of the cube event that kicked off the renaissance we're in now of local cube events that are happening that are all largely kind of doing it in the image of that sort of first CubeCon, which is now 4 years ago.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been 4 years. That's crazy to think about. And it is still the biggest. It happens in Madison, Wisconsin every year. And I think you're aiming for what? You have 600 tickets this year? Are you going to be transparent about that to the public?
Oh, I can be extra transparent. We are shooting for 700 open tickets.
All right.
We ran last year at, I believe, 552 players in our largest draft when we had 600 tickets available. So I'm hopefully we sell out, of course, but even if we run at like 650 this year, that would be amazing. That would be the largest cube event by far. Would be larger than some of the actual organized play tournaments that have happened this year. People coming out for a community format in those numbers is just so inspiring.
Truly incredible. And so if you want to play Cube on the biggest stage for Cube and also play at the event that has the broadest selection for the types of cubes you can play, I mean, it's actually kind of overwhelming to log into the Hedron network and be like, well, there's 50 or 60 or 70 cubes I can like choose from. I can choose to avoid some or like prefer some. It's some of the like best Magic you're gonna get to play in your entire life. It's just getting to play a bunch of different cube environments over the course of a weekend.
I mean, if you hit that 750 player goal, you need almost 100 cubes, right? Like that's pretty crazy.
We are planning on accepting, I believe, 98 cubes. So if 70 is overwhelming from last year, strap your boots on today because there's going to be a lot of ranked choice voting.
Do you at some point during the event just like put them all in one big pile and just like look at it? Just like, there's so much cube right here.
I am almost certain you said that exact thing years ago on the podcast. I'm going to send
Probably.
Here's a bounty. Listeners, if you can find the clip where Anthony said almost word for word that exact same thing about a previous CubeCon, I think.
It's going to be really funny when multiple people send in different clips of me saying the same thing.
Dated from different years, and we can't even tell because it'll just sound identical. You could just clip it out of there. But there's a lot of cubes in the same place. It's very exciting.
And to answer your question, yes, we do. Absolutely. And that's shockingly not a joke. Every single night when we leave the convention hall, we pile all of the cubes in a locked room on the other end of the convention center. We lock a judge in there with a rifle to guard them overnight. But I do on my phone somewhere have a picture from last CubeCon of every single cube in a wheelbarrow that we used to transport them.
Oh, that couldn't
I will
be
see
more
if
perfect.
I can find that picture for you.
I feel like you
I'll look after it eventually.
You at least got to get one of those like rolling platform carts they have at like Home Depot. You know, like one of those like low platforms that has wheels that you can then like roll around. Wheelbarrow's undignified.
That would have been shot like a lot more effective. It was a flat bottom wheelbarrow, so the cubes weren't all like.
That's better. I was picturing them all jaunty.
Corner-wise. No, luckily it was flat.
We're joking, but honestly, this is one of the most impressive things about this event, which is that it is so unique from playing any other format, where it's not just like, oh yeah, everybody's showing up with their own decks and sitting down and playing games. Like, there is this huge extra layer of management that I just really am impressed by the way that the CubeCon team has been able to figure out all the logistics for that.
it is a shockingly complicated dance to keep track of cards every single round. I actually talked about this in the CubeCon Discord somewhat recently, where one of the pieces of feedback that we got last year was people wanted like more complicated cubes available.
Jesus.
And
Crazy.
right,
More complicated in terms of like seeded packs, and pack 3 has comes from a different pool of cards, and every single pack has a legend in it. Like these kinds of things, or what are you talking about?
so yeah, that is what like a lot of people are looking for, because that's often like the kind of cubes they're playing in their local groups are these like very highly collated drafts that are meant to like emulate booster packs.
Interesting.
And the complexity, because there are so many cubes and so many cards and so many people, the complexity is like the ceiling on that has to be like brought down just a little bit to make the event like feasible and functional. As we get better at running this event, which I hope we continue to do, that ceiling will keep raising a little bit each year. So if you're excited for the most complicated cubes and heavy pack collation, hopefully in a year or two, once we're even better than we are today at running this thing.
Also, if you're excited about that, you're a sicko. Get help.
I mean, it is really interesting to get that insight. We've talked a little bit about how the cube scene, because it is so much like players playing in person, has a lot of regional variation. And so our local cube scene, basically everybody just does the, shuffle everything up and deal out normal packs. There's no collation aside from like 1 or 2 cubes maybe that we play occasionally. So it's interesting to hear that, yeah, there are just a lot of different regional variations.
Or at least a lot of vocal people from one region that are asking for the same
maybe
thing.
that have their one cube that they love to dream about how it will be collated that maybe they haven't gotten to play with as much as they would like to have.
I think a lot of people they're introduced to Cube through traditional retail limited, and the pack collation in retail limited is a huge part of the strategy and the deck building.
For sure.
And so I think it's very natural to kind of go from that into Cube with that pack collation on the mind. And I think it takes some outside the box thinking or encountering a weird cube to make people realize that, like non-collated cubes are all like interesting in very different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And speaking of building a cube sort of inspired by a set, do you think that collation is something that it makes sense to bring over to a set cube?
I think it can, if what you're really trying to do is replicate the retail limited environment, which sometimes is people's goal. They just love one set's limited format so much, and they just want to be able to play it forever once it's out of print without paying money.
Which is a pretty reasonable goal. That makes a lot of sense.
I have a Modern Horizons 2 cube because it was one of the first sets that I was really into playing limited on. I'd been playing Magic for a while before that, but that was the set that I got locked in on limited as my favorite format.
Let's start at the top and just kind of talk about what a set cube is, because I think it's actually a bigger tent than maybe people first realize. As we just alluded to, I think some set cubes are just attempting to be a pretty faithful recreation of the limited format. And in this case, the cubes are going to be quite large because you need to have enough duplicates of the commons and uncommons to not, have the rares be an outsized portion of the packs. They're going to be often collated, so you're actually building packs with, rares and uncommons and slots, which means you have to shuffle them correctly and then build the packs dynamically. Yeah, they're basically just trying to put that limited format in a box to have for all time. And I actually didn't know you had a cube like this, Jen. Is the Modern Horizons 2 cube you have the only other set cube in addition to your Ravnica Idealized cube?
I actually, as of right now, only have set cubes because they are my favorite kind of cubes.
The perfect guest for the set cube episode. We've done it again, Anthony.
I mean, at that point, it's almost interesting, where do you draw the line? Because if you're doing full collation, you're not even necessarily just playing a cube, you're just playing that format. You're not buying new booster packs, but it's kind of indistinguishable from if you were just opening new booster packs.
Yeah, the reason I like the Modern Horizons 3 cube in particular or Modern Horizons 2 cube, it offers people an opportunity to play retail limited without the buy-in. Especially people who are they've drafted a couple times on Arena, they're interested in sitting down for a draft. Where I live, New York City, drafting is really expensive. Drafts tend to run between $25 and $45, depending on where you go and what the set draft is. So being able to draft, kind of have that retail limited experience coming from the retail limited on Arena, transferring into paper without having to put up money to probably go 0-3 against New York's limited crowd, which is just a bunch of sickos. I think is like a nicer landing pad for people to get into paper drafting.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I feel like we've seen a lot of that in our local scene as well, where a lot of people that are pretty new to Magic are willing to try out Cube because it is, like, in some ways it's a little bit more intimidating, but without that financial barrier, does make it pretty accessible.
Yeah, you go 0-3 in a cube and you're like, that's a kind of a bummer, but I had fun. You go 0-3 in retail limited and you're like, oh, I paid $30 and I still didn't get anything.
Yeah, it really just sort of changes the feeling of it, of like, oh, I should have had more winning feelings from what I invested in this.
Yeah, but set cubes more broadly interest me mostly because of how I go about building cubes. I have the most fun building cubes when the building is at its most restricted. I find personally the prospect of building cubes with no, like vintage power level cubes with no restrictions, I don't personally find that very interesting to design, because often it's just like pick archetypes, play all the best cards for those archetypes. I don't find it like as thought-provoking or engaging, whereas limiting yourself heavily to what you can put in a cube makes for a much more enjoyable building experience for me.
It's funny, I think what you just said is probably true of like almost everybody that doesn't just want to play Power Max Cube. It's just that I think it's a degree of how like formalized and explicit that restriction can be, right? Like if you are going to build with no formalized, like, oh, the barriers are, it has to be from this plane or has to be from this set, then your sort of boundaries are more like just kind of soft, like, oh, it's the kind of magic I want to, embody. And ultimately, you're still working within a restriction. It's just like maybe more loosely defined one than a sort of very rigid restriction like you're describing.
Yeah, and the reason that I gravitate towards set cubes is because I just gravitate towards those kind of very rigid building restrictions. I find those enjoyable to work in. More fluid ones, I think, for a lot of people are going to be very fun. Most people who are into cube building restrict their build in some way, whether it be custom rules, whether it be vibes. One of the voting buckets for CubeCon this year is all about nostalgia bait cubes, which is where Ravnica got voted in, because it is definitely a nostalgia bait cube.
Before we go on to talk more about the sort of broader universe of different kinds of set cubes, on set cubes that are specifically designed to emulate a retail limited format, really quick, I kind of want to offer a little bit of a, like, I don't know, a counterpoint here, because I feel like when I first got into Cube, I heard about set cubes and this concept made sense to me. It's like, oh yeah, you can just make a box of your favorite retail limited format and then play that whenever you want for free. And, it's a great sort of very efficient and like, cool way to just like have a little like cube-esque object.
It's a very clear concept that's easy to sort of reference and get your head around.
It is, yeah. I feel like the more that I have played a bunch of cubes, as I sit here today, I kind of feel like if you are interested in like a set cube, I would very honestly with yourself do the math of like, how many times do I expect to draft this? And is it going to be worth the, honestly, like compared to a regular cube, I think a significant additional amount of like overhead, both in terms of like, these cubes do tend to be 500-600 cards. That's a ton of sleeves you have to buy, a ton of cards you have to sleeve. It is a lot of work to collate the packs, and I know from our local playgroup we do have a set cube or two that bounce around, and they are owned by people that are like very committed to doing all that overhead and all that sort of admin work. And think about if that's really worth the additional cost or worth the additional time compared to if you want to draft Modern Horizons 2 twice a year, maybe just get some Modern Horizons 2 packs or whatever until they dry up or become incredibly expensive. But I guess that's my only sort of thought, is that I think compared to like a normal or like non-set cube, specifically the collated ones designed to like replicate retail limited, feel like they actually are a ton of work compared to a regular cube, which is just something I would maybe want people to know if they're sort of thinking about this for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot of work in terms of you're not solving new problems. It's just a very straightforward procedure of like get 4 copies of each common or whatever, 3 copies of each uncommon, whatever you need to actually build the packs.
I've heard 4-2-1 and 5-3-1 bandied around.
Yeah, and it also depends on if you are actually trying to do the pack collation or if you, some other details there. But there's like not a lot of questions, but it is a ton of work. Like if you're going to end up with 700 cards, like that is just so many cards to manage and keep in a box and sleeve. And you have questions about like, are your commons, the sleeves are wearing in slower than the rares, and yeah, the long tail of all the extra logistics there is big. So I feel like if you're interested in a set cube, there are lots of other options which are maybe a little bit more work in terms of the decisions you're making, but less work in terms of just the logistics and overhead.
How do you manage those logistics, Jen?
I typically do all the work myself before draft time.
Yeah, you're one of those drafters I described that's like very happy to do all that extra work because you're like a stand-up community member and very willing to do work to make people have a good time, which not everybody is or has the time to do.
Yeah, I'm in a very lucky position that I can often be paid to do this work. Like if I'm hosting like a learner draft with a cube, like at my job, I can be paid for the time that it takes to collate all the packs and get everything ready. If you're not being paid, that sucks like way more. And some people are willing to do it for the love of the game, but I completely understand if people are not. Also, that all being said, like I love my Modern Horizons cube. I think the last time that it was drafted was probably more than 9 months ago. It just gets significantly less mileage than any of my other cubes.
Yeah, I found that in our local playgroup as well. I guess the last thing I'll say about the cubes just designed to mimic the retail limited set with like very little, if any, curatorial hand at all, is that the contents of a booster pack that you buy from Wizards of the Coast has a ton of competing motivations for what's actually included in there, right? Like the design of a set is not all about the limited format. It's about seeding cards for constructed. It's about telling a story, oftentimes related to a specific plane. It's about making sure that, when a player opens a pack, if they're, completely new to the game, they see like an interesting spread of card types and of like, mana costs and power and toughness, and just like they get a sort of good taste of the game. A lot of things that if you put the exact same designers, at Wizards of the Coast in charge of just making a limited format and ignoring all those other things, probably would be done differently. And so the other thing that I think happens a lot to people that make set cubes is that maybe you do all this work to make this big giant set cube, and then you're like, well, why is Hedron alignment even in here? Like yes, Hedron alignment was in Oath of the Gatewatch or whatever, but here we are now with Hedron alignment in this cube, and then you find yourself starting to make a couple changes, and then you're on the road to what we're going to talk about, which is like these sort of broader universe of set-inspired cubes, which can be anywhere from, pretty close to a faithful recreation of the limited format, maybe with a little bit of a hand, in there to remove unplayable cards or, really egregious power outliers, all the way to like something that is very loosely themed based on a set, but could include cards from wherever you want. And I think that people find themselves on that sort of journey for a reason, which is just that I think sometimes maybe you do all that work to like actually formalize the retail limited set in a cube object, and then you realize like, well, actually, I kind of want more mana fixing, or I kind of don't want, as many huge bombs or unplayable cards, and then you just find yourself actually making something different.
I definitely think which direction to go is like very dependent on what the goal is. And you're also going to always be somewhat limited by what set or what limited environment you're trying to recreate. And what I mean by that is if you love Ikoria, the setting, if you loved Ikoria Limited, you have one set to draw cards from that actually take place on Ikoria, and a couple handful from like Foundations and Modern Horizons products. So you are in that way kind of forced to go outside of Ikoria specifically to look for cards to fill out the cube and to make it a really good limited environment. Whereas if you are making Dominaria cube, every set's on Dominaria basically. You have, I think probably 40 plus sets to draw from. So like if you want to make a set cube based on Dominaria, you probably don't need to go outside of Dominaria to have as many cards as you need.
Honestly, you might need another restriction to feel like you're actually working within a limited card pool and not just kind of pulling from all of Magic minus a few oddities,
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're naturally sort of alluding to here is that the natural extension of a set cube is a multi-set cube, or like a theme cube that's based around a plane. And I think that's a really easy way to kind of extend that narrative cohesiveness or aesthetic cohesiveness by combining multiple sets that take place in the same theme, or often, from the era of blocks, taking a couple of sets that are part of the same block, so they're also mechanically kind of designed to work together. That makes a lot of sense. It's not necessarily the only way to do it, though, and I know we have a couple cubes in our local group that are either just mashing up two things, like there's a new cube somebody's been designing that's mashing up Bloomburrow and what is the exact thing? Like all the creepy creatures from Duskmourn. So It's like creepy creatures versus cute creatures. So there's definitely like other approaches you can take to expanding those restrictions a little bit, even if you're stuck in something that's kind of narrow like Ikoria as the thing that's really drawing your attention.
One, I think, really excellent example of how to do that well is Khan's Expanded Cube by Elliot Raff. Khan's expanded cube started, in my understanding, as like a Khan set cube, and then came to the realization, this was before Dragonstorm, I only have 3 sets. I kind of gotta look at some older face-down morph cards and some other cards to flesh out mechanics and make it like more interesting and more dynamic. And I think it does a really excellent job at channeling the vibe of Khans of Tarkir without limiting itself to just Khans of Tarkir cards. And that I think is a great way to channel the vibe of a set if you don't have the deep card pool that a handful of sets do.
I'm curious what your take is on breaking Singleton in set cubes like this. I mean, obviously, if you are trying to mimic a retail limited set, you are going to have to break Singleton on the commons and uncommons just to, make them actually more common and uncommon, as it were. But if you are going further afield and actually designing a set that is just, inspired by a specific set or a specific plane, how do you feel about breaking Singleton in that context?
Singleton is like a pretty default cube rule, but I think the golden rule of cube is that you can break every single rule if it makes the gameplay more fun. People are thinking about breaking Singleton for something. The metric I use for myself is I try and justify the Singleton break to myself, and if I don't find it very convincing, I don't do it. If I do find it convincing, I do. In early versions of Ravnica Idealized, there was a couple Singleton breaks for persistent petitioners, and I played with it a couple times, and I made the argument to myself that like persistent petitioners is such an iconic card. It supports a mill archetype in blue-black, and then I just decided that it didn't support that archetype enough, and it wasn't fun enough or interesting enough that it just wasn't worth breaking that particular rule for. But in other cubes where breaking Singleton really improves the experience or really like holds an archetype together, like break Singleton if you think it makes your cube more fun.
Yeah, I feel like a specific sort of niche of set cubes, I don't see that often, but will be interested in playing more of is set cubes that are like, just a step or two away from fully mimicking the retail limited format and still breaking Singleton for the cards that are really like the pillars of the archetypes of that limited format.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you're talking about a card like most limited sets will have this sort of skeleton where they'll have a small red removal spell and a big red removal spell, or same with black. And if you only allow yourself to have that one hard removal spell in each color, that can be pretty limiting. So that's an obvious place to start on some Singleton breaks.
Yeah, or like the signpost gold uncommons, are
Sure.
so often really important to the limited format, and having multiples of those seems like it would be, useful. But someone doing that, but then also, cutting cards that they just feel like are not their favorite to play with, don't have their favorite play patterns, like a little more sort of curatorial voice, but still willing to sort of break Singleton in a like non-structured way, not saying like, well, I'll break Singleton if a card, refers to multiples, or I'll break Singleton for, just commons in this way, but instead like breaking Singleton for the cards that they feel are most emblematic of the things about that limited format they're trying to capture. I feel like you don't see that as often. It's often like, I'm emulating the retail limited set, or I have gone all the way to the other side and I'm like, it's inspired by this limited set, but I'm kind of doing whatever I want, but I'm mostly adhering to like things you see very often in Cube, like Singleton. So that middle space I think is really interesting, though, that I don't see many cubes in.
I think that's definitely true. I would attribute most of it to complexity spiral, where once your cube starts getting more complex, you have more opportunities to make it more complex. And then it just quickly spirals out from the original idea of like most set cubes, the process going in is like, I want this to be like approachable and accessible to people. And you quickly spiral away from that to like, I want the best gameplay possible for the group that plays this regularly. And it's hard to stop in the middle there, because once you start on the endeavor of like perfecting gameplay, it's a tough ask for yourself to just like stop in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's also just a fact that, people tend to gravitate towards more rigid constraints and saying this cube is either trying to emulate, retail limited, or it is, Singleton. Those are like two very easy to explain rigid constraints versus like this amorphous in between space of like, yeah, it's the vibes of the retail limited set, but I am breaking Singleton sometimes, but not all the time. That is much harder to sort of wrap people's heads around.
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult to know when exactly the Singleton break is justified versus not, without just playing the cube a ton, which some people don't have the opportunity to do, whether it because of lack of local play group or lack of time. And also because every time you play the cube, it takes 4 hours. If you want to play like the full 3 rounds, it's not something you can just like sit down and do in 30 minutes.
Jenn, why don't you give us a complete introduction to Ravnica Idealized? We've alluded to it a couple times on this episode, and we've talked about it in past episodes of the show a little bit in passing, where we talked about fixing density in that cube or a couple other things about it. But for people that are not familiar with this cube at all, where exactly does Ravnica Idealized sit in this sort of range of how you can build a set cube, and how did it come to be?
So it came to be because Ravnica was the set I started playing in and has always been the set that I've loved the most. The art really captured me. The Fantasy Ecumenopolis really worked in my 8-year-old brain. And it's just been my most beloved setting ever since. Because of that actually, I think, informed the building restriction for the cube, which is not that cards have to be a Ravnica printing. It's that the art on the card must depict Ravnica. It doesn't open up a ton of cards because you're at that point you're looking in core sets with Ravnica art, premium sets like Modern Horizons sets with Ravnica art.
Do you get commander decks and stuff like that sometimes too that will have that?
Yes, a couple commander. Once in a while they'll put out a commander deck and a card will get new art for some reason. Often it's licensing issues, I would hazard to guess. The March of the Machines commander decks had a bunch of Ravnica setting cards that added a ton. Modern Horizons 3 had a couple, including Indebted Spirit, which is both very strong and very on theme for a couple of the archetypes. If I recall correctly, there's less than 10 cards that fall into that weird gap between they're not a Ravnica printing, but the art is unambiguously Ravnica.
And just to be clear, that's a judgment call you have to make. It's not like Wizards puts a little symbol somewhere that indicates this is Ravnica. It'll you'll see, one of the guild symbols, or you'll see like a clear city or a character that's always on Ravnica. You have to kind of make that judgment for yourself, though.
Yeah, effectively. One of the cards that is in there is Realmbreaker's Brass, which was printed in March of the Machine. And it shows the invasion tree fighting one of the Selesnya elementals. But because it's very clearly a Selesnya elemental, you can just identify this as Ravnica art, and therefore it's kosher for the cube.
How do you balance, in your approach to the Ravnica Idealized cube, gameplay versus like vibes? I feel like for every card choice, there's going to be like, well, this is really on theme for like the Ravnica setting. It really speaks to the vibes I'm trying to evoke here, but maybe, it's just not powerful enough, or it doesn't really fit the themes mechanically of the cube, versus I'm sure there's other cards that, would fit perfectly mechanically, but just either don't have any association with Ravnica or a really tenuous association with Ravnica. How do you balance those gameplay, mechanical goals, and those sort of flavor goals?
Gameplay in this cube is king, unless the vibes are good enough.
Fair. That's a totally fair response.
And it's a deeply unsatisfying and unspecific answer. But there are a couple cards in the cube that are just so quintessentially Ravnica that even though they're not the most on theme or the most powerful, it just feels like you have to include them. A good example of that, I think, is Invasion of Ravnica from March of the Machines.
I mean, that certainly speaks to the theme here.
It's very, very on theme, obviously, but it is the only colorless card in the entire cube. And I broke my rule of no colorless cards for this card because I thought the theme was so good and it wasn't completely unplayable.
Yeah, because the flavor text basically says, put me in the Ravnica cube. So, you kind of got to do it.
You do have to listen to the Oracle text. Other than that, it is like gameplay is absolutely the most important consideration when making this cube. But like, it is Ravnica cube after all, and there are some obligations that you are held to because it's Ravnica cube.
I mean, it's interesting. It sounds like you sort of have a series of funnels bouncing back and forth, where it's like, first you have this very hard restriction of it has to meet this qualification of vibes in a pretty quantifiable way. Like, either it's from one of these sets or clearly illustrated to be in one of these sets.
Like, it does not matter how good a Phyrexian card is on mechanics, even though mechanics rule, that is like ruled out by that first filter
right.
he's describing.
And then the next filter is what's the best for gameplay, and then you have this sort of third filter of, okay, but now let's go back and be a little loosey-goosey and see if we need to fix any of those vibes a bit.
Yeah, pretty much. Another bit of fun that I had with building was finding cycles of cards that I could run. One of the cycles is there is a guild mage in every color. That's tough because a lot of the guild mages are not very good. But every color pair has 3 options for guild mages now. So picking like the least unplayable one was the option for some of them. Like the Rakdos one is Cult Guild Mage, which is a 2-mana 2/2, and that's kind of the nice thing most people can say about it. But because like I have the 9 other ones, it feels like you have to have the cycle. But yeah, it's definitely like filtered down. My general cube building is I put in all of the cards that I think might be in the cube, and then I pare it down to 360, 480, whatever number that I want to pare it down to. I have been told by many people that is a psychotic way to build cubes and is way more work than
What? No,
carefully.
I don't know how else to do
adding
it.
Cubes.
That seems like the only way to do it to me. I don't know what else would you do. Just like actually just add one card at a time until you got to 360.
I was in a long conversation with a couple friends who insist that that's the best way, but that sounds deranged to me. How can I pick between all of my favorite children?
Yeah, I feel like that's like trying to get the piece of art right on the very first draft. It's like no part of
just paint the painting simply by starting in the top left corner and put the right color there.
Yes, exactly. Like just go top left, bottom to the bottom right.
Why have my recall for a certain artist? Chuck Close, is that right?
Chuck, yeah, I believe so.
Great. I know he's out there doing literally that, but it's just him, and it's because he's very face blind.
Here's a fun piece of trivia that I learned while making Ravnica Cube. Surge foiling, which first appeared, quote unquote, in the Warhammer Collector Commander decks, apparently is a reuse of an old asset they used for Ravnica box toppers.
Really?
So I was going through a bulk bin in a store in Canada at one point. I was up there for the Canadian RC, and I stumbled across a Surge Foil Dimir Guildmage from the original 2005 Ravnica Limited. And it sent me down a rabbit hole of figuring out what this was. Apparently, Surge Foiling was just something they did for promos and box toppers at the time, and then they abandoned for 20 years until they decided to pick it back up for Warhammer.
And when they did, they didn't just like make a new asset. That's wild.
I think it might be slightly different, but it looks really similar.
At least the foiling process is like
by.
the same.
Yeah, but there's I think building a set cube with that kind of hard restriction is also a fun way to learn more about Magic's history, especially if you're building set cubes with sets that go back so long. Like, I don't know if I would have ever encountered Surge Foil Dimir Guildmage if I wasn't building Ravnica cubes specifically, because the card is unplayable pretty much everywhere.
Or at least not registered it when you did come across it. You would have just, flipped right past it like any other card, but your unique lens allowed it to sort of call out to you.
Yeah, I saw a foil original print Ravnica card, and my cube brain immediately activated. I must have it.
You mentioned pulling cards from multiple different sets on the same plane. Is that something that's ever challenging just because the design of cards have evolved over time?
It was the largest challenge for building Ravnica Cube, because the first 3 Ravnica sets, most of those cards are pretty unplayable by modern standards. The second 3 Ravnica sets are a lot better, but then like War of the Spark, the power level in cards in War of the Spark blows everything else that Ravnica had done up to that point out of the water. And then Murders at Karlov Manor had a kind of similar problem. So there are a lot of very powerful cards from War of the Spark and MKM that I just can't run, because even though they're like commons and uncommons, the power level is so far beyond everything else Ravnica had been doing up to that point.
Interesting, yeah, and I'm sure there's multiple different ways you could approach this, but like obviously the challenge is if you put the 2 sets fully next to each other and one of them is just much more powerful, the old cards just never get played, which is a little bit disappointing. So that's interesting to hear. Your strategy is often to exclude some of the higher powered cards from the newer sets in order to get something that's still pulling from multiple eras, but the cards can be more in dialogue with each other.
Yeah, it's something that I'm facing again. I'm currently in the process of making a Mirrodin cube along similar lines to the Ravnica cube of all art must depict Mirrodin. And the issue that I'm running into is gold cards. Ravnica, the original Ravnica sets had 0 gold cards. The second Ravnica block, I believe, had 2 gold cards in the entire set.
Wait,
so if
you're talking about Mirrodin now, just to be clear. Ravnica is full of gold cards.
Yeah, Mirrodin specifically.
Boy, I was so confused for a second there. I was like, the first Ravnica set had no gold cards? What?
No, it was actually mostly gold cards, luckily.
Okay, whew, I really was like, do I understand Magic at all for a second? I like totally.
But the first two Mirrodin blocks have 2 gold cards combined over across 6 sets. So if you want to do a traditionally designed draft where like gold cards are your signposts for draft archetypes, you have to use all of the gold cards from All Will Be One, which is the first Mirrodin set with a lot of gold cards in them. But then you're just playing All Will Be One limited for the most part because all your signpost uncommons are from the archetypes from All Will Be One. So I just had to kind of abandon the concept of gold cards entirely and just accept that people were going to have to take signposts in monocolor, which definitely makes the cube less accessible to new players, but also is a very, very different draft experience than most retail limited and also most cubes that you get.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me sounds like a lot of upside to make something that is unique to the restraint that you're dealing with. And if you're just like trying to cram that constraint into exactly the same form that people are used to seeing, then you're not necessarily going to come up with something that's as interesting or at least as unique.
Yeah, and set cubes, I have found time and time again, often produce some of like the most interesting and unique draft archetypes and gameplay. Because the requirement for cards is so restrictive, you have to get kind of cute and get kind of silly with some of the archetypes, because what archetypes you might want to be pushing them towards are just so underpowered in the sets that they appeared in. And if you're not bringing in a ton of outside cards to support the archetype, you just need to find something else that color pair is doing. That was something that I dealt with in blue-black, especially in Ravnica Cube, where the blue-black deck is very... The blue-black decks in the original retail limited were often like control-themed or mill-themed, which are typically either unfun archetypes to play against in limited or under-supported archetypes in limited. It is more difficult to support control than it is to support aggro when your card pool is so limited like this. So I ended up going with like more of a tempo game plan, which has not really ever been a supported archetype in the retail limited environments from Ravnica. But there are a lot of like efficient cards that just were printed as pack filler or to support archetypes with different color pairs that just when put together make for a pretty interesting low to the ground blue-black tempo deck.
Yeah, listening to you talk about your various set cubes and knowing what I know about Ravnica Idealized, it strikes me that your path to this doesn't seem like it's ever been, I love this retail limited set, therefore I will make a set cube. It's more like you love the plane, like the set, but your Ravnica Idealized cube intentionally eschews the 5-color good stuff deck that was kind of dominant in at least early Ravnica Limited, and you're talking about how the like original Mirrodin sets didn't have any of the sort of like signpost cards for retail limited, which is like just a fact of what that retail set was like. So is it safe to say that most of your sort of draw for these set cubes is not actually the like retail limited format as much as the sort of limited card pool and the plane itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I played some original Ravnica Limited when it came out, but I was, as I said, I was 8. So my experience with it was mostly me losing because I was 8 years old and therefore kind of bad at Magic. So I don't have any super strong feelings of nostalgia for it because the number of times I played it was limited, pun intended. It was really the art and the setting that made me fall in love with Magic in the first place, and that was definitely the primary goal that I was going for, was to invoke the setting, not to invoke any specific sets.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about a set cube being a way to play with a plane that you really like or a theme you really like, but whose retail limited set you don't like, and you're like, well, I'm instead going to take these pieces and I'm going to put them together differently so that we can play with these cards, but in a context where, going back to your early reference of Ikoria, like, let's just make it so red-white cycling is not the best deck that kind of dominates and colors the entire limited format, but instead cut that out or whatever so that we can recontextualize all these other archetypes and themes. It's a really cool opportunity for a set cube to put these cards in a different context where you still get to play with the mutate theme or the sort of monsters thing, but it's not entirely colored by however the sort of limited format happened to be balanced by Wizards.
Yeah, I think that fixing limited environments is such a fun and cool idea for cubes. I played in a lobby con, so I can't even shout the person out who made it. But somebody out there has a Homelands cube that I played in a hotel lobby in Vegas 2 years ago. The shtick behind it was Homelands, famously not a very good set. But what if the limited environment was really good? And so they had built out, using kind of the base mechanics from Homelands and bringing in a bunch of cards from outside of that particular set, just to reinforce the archetypes, to kind of be like, this is what Wizards of the Coast was going for. They might have missed the mark on this set specifically, but I fixed it.
How did they do that? Like, where are you pulling all the additional hominids and cephalids you need?
Changelings, baby. Changelings.
It was a lot of changelings.
That's interesting. Okay.
But I had such a blast playing it because it was such clear jank that had been tuned to perfection. And perfected jank is I think an underexplored archetype for building cubes that I'd love to see more of.
I do really love the polishing a turd category of any kind of art, where it's like you really committed to the bit and like took kind of terrible source material but then made something beautiful with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I tried to recreate Homeland's cube on my own because I couldn't find the original list. And all the efforts that I made, I kept coming up and being like, I don't think this is as good as the one that I played in Vegas, and I gave up at some point. So if you're out there and that was you with a Homelands cube in Vegas, hit me up on Twitter. I'd love to see the list again.
Another bounty. We need a clip of Anthony saying, do you ever put all the cubes in a pile and just look at them, recorded 1 or 2 years ago? And one of you surely at least knows the person that has his Homelands cube. Get them in touch with Jenn.
I'd love to see the list. That was one of my formative cube experiences.
Do you have a rough timeline? How long ago was this?
Oh, God. I think that it was Magic... No, it wasn't Magic 30. It was the Vegas after Magic 30. So that was 2023 Vegas, I think.
All right, I believe in us. I believe we can make this happen then.
Honestly, I've been to so many conventions at this point. They all do blend together at some point. But it was in Vegas, and it wasn't Magic 30. So I have to assume that it was MagicCon Vegas 2023, which was the Wilds of Eldraine MagicCon.
Man, I'm just looking at the Homelands cards, and the thing that really strikes me most of all is that the text on these cards is so unreadable, just like the contrast, especially on the red cards between the background and the text. Or no, the green cards are the worst.
I get Homelands and Fallen Empires confused. There are hominids in Homelands?
Maybe not.
Or is that a Fallen Empires thing?
It was Minotaurs was the big new Homelands archetype.
We got Wall of Kelp. That's a really cool one.
I didn't hate our Fallen Empires draft we did all those years ago. It was, I think, fascinating to play in such a janky environment where my deck was just... I had like 6 copies of High Tide, which should be broken, but I was playing in Fallen Empires Limited, and so the only thing I could do was just ramp out a Deep Spawn, and it's like, all right, well, or Hominid Deep Spawn, or whatever that thing's called. It's like a 7-mana 6/6 with a horrible downside. But it was interesting, I thought. It's fun to play. This is like, I don't know, just to reiterate, I think we say on the show all the time, like, if you're worried your cube is going to be bad, it's so fun to, like, figure out what makes a limited format tick, even if the limited format is, like, kind of objectively bad. So... just play your cube. It'll be fun to figure it out.
I mean, we also talk a lot about how important setting expectations are, and that's a pretty cool way to, like, especially if you're like, this is my Homelands, but fixed cube, like, people's expectations are going to be already on the floor, so if you give them something interesting, they're going to have a good time. And I think that's also similar with, even picking a beloved plane like Ravnica, that people are just going to go into it with the expectation that it's going to be a flavorful experience and it's going to be nostalgic if those are formats that they played. So as great as a designer, it's also great as a way to create a positive experience for your players.
Yeah, absolutely. What I have always loved most about Cube is that it is something that you can build and spend a lot of time working on that then other people get to enjoy, and you get to like experience them enjoying this thing that you worked on for so long. I think it's like similar to the joy of like cooking for other people. You're cooking up your own cube that you've spent tons of time and made with love, and then you get to enjoy it with other people that you hopefully like. And if what you love about Magic is Homelands cards, more power to you.
I mean, Say what you will about Homeland's cards. This giant spider thing on Trade Caravan, that might be my favorite thing about Magic now. I've definitely looked at this card before, but I have not noticed the giant
thing
spider.
Unlocked.
I mean, look at this thing. What is that?
Wow.
It's pretty great.
That is awesome. You are so right.
Go check out the cards mentioned page because this is important.
It's important stuff.
It's definitely Kaya Folio art.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I love the Phil Folio just got the a secret layer. As contentious as the availability of that secret layer drop might have been, the Folios are some of my like all-time greatest Magic artists for just how iconic and interesting and sometimes wacky the art for their arts were.
We've talked about your process for kind of like finding the cards and gathering the material for the Ravnica Idealized Cube. What was the design process like, I guess, after you played the first rounds with it, played your first draft? Like, did it play out like you expect? Was there a lot of iteration beyond that?
I think the first draft, the first time playing Ravnica Cube was actually the most defeated I ever felt in Cube design.
We've all been
Many
there.
Cube designers can relate to this.
I set out with such a clear goal in mind of making a Ravnica limited environment that wasn't just 5-color soup every time. And the first time we drafted it, somebody drafted 5-color soup and had the easiest 3060 I've seen in a long time. And I felt devastated that this had happened. And it was done entirely on the back of the clan signets, which are iconically Ravnica and like some of the most recognizable Ravnica cards around because of Commander nowadays, and just cannot be included in the cube because colorless fixing and colorless acceleration just makes 5-color soup so good so easily. You get 2 or 3 of those things and you're off to the races.
Yeah, I also iconically busted like just staples of powerful cubes for the longest time because colorless ramp and fixing in one is a lot.
It's funny to me that this was kind of the core challenge of Ravnica as a set. Like when Mark Rosewater was first designing it, his goal was, how do we make a multicolor set where people aren't playing, you're not incentivized to play all the colors, like it's specifically a 2-color set.
Which is funny, because we take that for granted now that's like
right.
how Magic works, but prior to this, if you look at the gold sets like Invasion or Apocalypse, it was like, the more colors you play, the better. Like that was like the design from the top down.
Yeah, and so it's funny to hear about sort of like digging back into Ravnica from this new perspective as a cube designer. Some of those same challenges still exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I railed against last time on Lucky Paper, 5-color soup is not an interesting draft archetype to me. I think if I recall correctly, I fixed it by the original run had 2 copies of each shock, a surveil land, a bounce land, and the clue lands for each set, and then the guild signets. And I trimmed the guild signets out, and that made it better. But like most people were still heavily in 3 colors. Some people were in 4 colors, and then I trimmed the lands down from 5 fixing lands per color pair to 3. And that got me where I was actually aiming for, which is most people are in 2 colors, some people are in 3 colors. But it was a tinkering process of 2 or 3 drafts before I was able to fix the fundamental mistake of guild signets. But yeah, I was, as I'm sure most cube designers have felt when they see somebody do something with their cube that they did not intend. It's just a devastating feeling.
Yeah, it really can be. I mean, my first experience with regular Cube was a little bit like that as well, where people were just not playing the kinds of games that I expected. But to like put a qualifier on that, like I'm sure that your players still had a great time in that draft, and the person who was drafting the 5-color soup deck was probably delighted to be going 3060 and doing it very easily. So even though it is in some way like a failure, and you as a creative person trying to design a very specific experience, like sure, you didn't accomplish your goals, but you weren't a failure in the sense of like showing a bad time to your playmates.
Yeah, everyone had a really good time making fun of me that 5-color good stuff was still the best deck in the cube.
I'm glad you jumped in right away so that Anthony couldn't change his word choice from playmate, and now that just has to be included in the edit.
No, it's I actually I think that's absolutely correct. I felt at the time I was like watching I didn't even play. I found 8 people to play and I just watched because I wanted to get to experience as many games as possible. And I remember standing behind the person who drafted the soup deck and just being like a little angry, being like, "You're not supposed to be able to do this. How dare you?"
It's such a universal experience for cube designers. We've all been there. And the most recent one for me was actually really vexing, and it was like 2 weeks ago, where my Sacred Geometry cube has like an artifact matters like light theme. I'm very much in the spirit of Anthony of like, just put a couple cards in there so like it's not like an on rails thing where you have to be the artifact deck, but maybe it comes together sometimes. And it's been like 10 or so drafts of his cube, and so far the artifact deck had not come together. Some players were saying, "Oh, this deck is trap, it's no good." I was convinced that pieces were there. It's just that, people hadn't done it yet. And sure enough, the 3-0 deck from a couple weeks ago of this draft was like an artifact deck full of artifact matters stuff like Steel Overseer and Patchwork Automaton and Sharoom the Hegemon.
Hell yeah.
And I was really excited to see this deck and like had a couple of weird inclusions in the main deck. Like it was a very creature heavy deck that was main decking Day of Judgment, and it was like kind of splashing for like one counter spell, and like a couple things I was like kind of a little bit confused by, but just overall thrilled about the deck. And then I looked at the sideboard and my heart sank when I saw Scrap Trawler, Triskelion, the Triskelion Graceful Restoration combo in the sideboard, Perilous Mirror, Metallic Mimic, Razormane Masticore. It's
Razormane Masticore is the one that surprises me because that's a card that I just don't pass that card.
I mean,
like any format.
Everyone's got different card evaluations, right? Like I trust that like some people might like Razormane Masticore, some people might not like it, but just like as a cube designer, the fact that I failed to have the person playing the artifact deck put Scrap Trawler in their deck, I'm just like, this is like a humongous failure of mine somehow.
Did they win?
Yeah, they 3-0'd the whole draft.
Okay, so they're right. We're wrong.
That is not how Magic works, and you know it. Yeah, I felt like, dang, you're like playing this board wipe in a creature deck instead of playing the Scrap Trawler?
I do kind of like playing a board wipe in a format like this.
I know you do, it's sicko. What's the by invitation only sicko is what you are?
Sure.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. You can say your point now.
No, I mean, it's just sometimes it's like a oops, I win button when you draw it and your opponent just is like, yeah, this is kind of like a low-powered format. I'm just going to roll out my creatures and this is going to be fine. Maybe that's not good gameplay, but I will try to do that.
It's also sometimes an oops, I lose button because you're like...
You cast it and you're like, I had 6 creatures, you had none. Why did I do that?
Well, yeah. But even if, like, the more realistic situation is like you're a tiny bit ahead on board and your only card in hand is a board wipe, and you're like, if this was anything else, I'd be massively ahead on board.
I feel the big wins more than the small losses. Okay. So that's my reinforcement.
Anyway, just to say that the unique pain you feel as a cube designer when you see your players doing not what you wanted them to do is really only felt by you. Your players are just having a good time and not thinking about it at all.
And that's what we're gonna leave the listeners with today: the pain of design failure.
Yes, this is a unique pain that only happens when you design cubes, and you should do it. It's fun.
A unique pain, unique to every one of us.
Yeah, and it is such like a wake up and education when people are doing things your cube is not designed to do, and you're like, oh, of course that works, and I just have never thought about it before. It can do a great job at like recontextualizing how you look at your cube, and I think it's one of the best ways to help make the cube better.
In terms of putting a bow on this, Jen, if you had to like summarize all of your vast experience with rigid set cubes that are emulating Retail Limited all the way to Ravnica Idealized, which is a sort of very thematic but, not directly inspired by Retail Limited cube. If you had to sort of summarize all your experience to people that are interested in building their own set cube for the first time, what are your like top tips?
The first suggestion I would have is like make a decision on what the goal for the cube is. If it is meant to invoke your experiences playing this limited format, focus on that. If it is meant to invoke your love of the setting, focus on that. They're both perfectly valid ways to build set cubes, but they have completely different design requirements and design restrictions. And one trap that I have fallen into before is not making a decision until I have 600 cards added on Cube Cobra. And then I'm sitting there being like, what is this cube about? What am I doing here? What is the goal of this endeavor?
I don't think that's a trap. I think that's cube design. I do that all the time. Just put a big old fat pile of cards in a list and like do some excavating. Like, what patterns do you see? What like looks exciting together? I think that's a bug, not a feature. Or the opposite. I think it's a feature, not a bug.
Look, none of us can speak today. We're all saying weird stuff.
No, you said playmate very clearly.
I think that's the concept of I'm carving I'm revealing the hidden art within this block of marble versus I know what I'm making out of this block of marble. I think they're both great ways to make art, but they lend themselves to different people differently.
Well, if you're listening and you want to play Ravnica Idealized, or I'm sure a number of other set cubes in the 98 cube list that will consist of this year's CubeCon, you can attend CubeCon. Tickets are on sale as this episode is airing. You're still a part of Gamehole Con, and it requires buying a Gamehole Con pass as well as a CubeCon pass, correct, Jen? Did you want to explain that a little bit?
Yep, we'll have a one-page little zine available to explain the process because it is a little complicated. But we exist within Gamehole Con this year. We do that because it spares us a great deal of logistical work of running a convention fully on our own. So it requires purchasing a Gamehole Con pass. I believe those are going to be available in August. I don't remember exactly which date. I'll get that to you. And it involves buying one of two CubeCon passes. One gets you in the door and gets you in the main event. The other one gets you in the door. Once you're in the door, you can play in all the side events. You can play in open play. You can borrow cubes from the open play library. You can do everything that CubeCon has to offer except the main event. The main event is everything. Main event, side events, extracurriculars, etc., etc.
So you are able to buy the CubeCon pass before the Gamehole Con pass goes on sale in a few weeks' time.
Yes, that is correct.
We'll put all that in the show notes, obviously, so go check the show notes if you want to attend. And if you've never been to any Cube event, we cannot recommend them highly enough. And, I mentioned earlier that CubeCon is like the spiritual ancestor of all of these sort of other, even smaller events that are popping up. It's also a very practical ancestor in the sense that Gwen built the first version of Hedron Network for the first CubeCon. It has since been iterated on many times, and that is the backbone of so many of these smaller Cube events that would obviously never be able to afford to commission custom software to run their events. So this big boon of local Cube events and that are happening all over the world all have CubeCon to thank. If you want to attend the Cube event, you can go. Madison, Wisconsin this year. We should say the dates, right? We should say the dates, probably. October 16th to 19th, right?
That is correct. And I know that because I just sent out my first wave of judge staff acceptances.
Very exciting stuff.
But also, definitely, huge shout out to Gwen. Without Cube Cobra, without Hedron Network, like the Cube Renaissance that we live in today would definitely not be nearly as large. So I'm very excited to be working with Gwen again and Hedron Network being available at CubeCon 2025.
Yeah, you couldn't run the event without it. I'm not sure what you would do. I don't think it's possible. So big shout out to Gwen for sure. That's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you for tuning in. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and set cubes and speaking into microphones about it. Anthony and Jen, thank you for the gifts of friendship and the gifts of Cube.
Happy to be here, as always.
Thanks for maybe a few weeks from now trying my mulberry wine.
I'll try anything.
Great. Okay, then I have some weirder projects in the pipeline.
I'll try anything once.